Tonight I'm going to start ripping down this rear end. So I'm going to start by just taking off all the brake lines, kind of getting them out of the way. And then I can start to clean up, grind off all this shit. Cut all these mounts and all that off that I'm not going to get used. Grind up a pumpkin here. Get it all ready for the 4-link. Right now I'm working on setting this rear end where it needs to be so I can mount all the 4-link stuff, all these goodies that I showed you guys in the previous video. So what I started off with first was kind of measuring is the height of my transmission tail shaft. I went based off my motor mounts and kind of did a few little calculations. Ideally I would like to wait until this motor and transmission are in, but I don't have a cherry picker available right now, so I'm just going to keep measuring and do what I've been doing. So I ended up getting a calculation of the tail shaft of the transmission being about 16 inches off the ground, which is about level with this hole here. So what I'm doing is I took this rear end here, and if you can look kind of on a plane, I lined it up with that, approximately with that, right? So right now I have that drive shaft, so it's gonna sit flat, and this is at ride height. As the frame moves up, it'll pull up the car, right? In turn, making the height of the tail shaft be a little bit higher, while the rear end is just gonna roll. It's not actually gonna go up, you know, because this is stationary because you have a 30-inch tire or a tire sitting here at all times. So that's gonna actually increase the angle up this way, so it's gonna be up like this, and then when it's laid out, it's gonna be down like this. So right now I just have it set at medium. I believe the yoke on these is supposed to be 3 degrees down at your ride height, so it should be slightly down. So when you're giving it torque, the rear end actually turns and it counteracts the 3 degrees. It's kind of like a counteracting force. I'm not positive about that. I'll look into that. But basically I'm going to set this, and then I'll have my rod ends over here to adjust, right? So I can adjust these, spin them out, spin them in a little bit, whatever. So I'm just getting it really close now, and then final adjustments later once I get everything all put in the car. So now I've measured from a bunch of different points to make sure this axle is exactly where I want it. Basically I just measured from a central location, like you can see, like say measure from the center of that hub there out to say the end of the corner of a frame rail, You can measure from maybe one of the old mounts to somewhere on the frame or something like that. Make sure it's the same, and then you can measure from the front face of the axle here up to the front of your frame or whatever. So now I got this all centered, and what I'm going to do now is I'm going to work on the end links here, work on adjusting them to get these length bars, or get these to where they need to be as far as length. So when you first start on these, you want to start by checking the size of your thread. So this is a 3/4 inch thread right here. So one of the basic rules of working with stuff like this is you want at least as much depth as the width of your thread. So you can see there's quite a bit of thread that was in there. I'm going to keep going here. Okay, so if you have a 3/4 inch wide bung like this one is, this is a 3/4 inch thread, you're going to want at least 3/4 of an inch of your rod, or of your end link, threaded into your rod here. So you can see this is actually 2.5 inches of thread, right? So if I'm following that general rule of I want at least 3/4 of an inch, because that's 3/4 of an inch wide, right? Then I'm going to have, what is that, 1 3/4 of play. Well, I'm going to set this so I have 1 inch in, at least 1 inch in, right? So I'll thread this into 1 inch or so, and then I'll take the difference, right? So 1 inch minus 2.5 is 1.5 inches, right? So that means I'm going to want to set this jam nut at 3/4 of an inch from this face right here, because that'll give me 3/4 of an inch of adjustment each way. So either way, no matter what, I'm going to have 3/4 of an inch adjustment, but I'll still always have my inch of thread inside of this rod here. 3/4 of an inch adjustment is more than enough, but you want to have enough threads. So that's just kind of a basic trick there. These are nice because they have long shafts on them. Some of the cheaper ones only got short ones, which doesn't give you as much adjustment. So now I'll get all these set so I have 3/4 of an inch, just like this end down here. And then I can shorten it, I can lengthen it 3/4 of an inch or so, in case I have maybe a little bit of alignment issues. if I want to change the angle of the pinion, anything like that. So I got to do all 4 of these like this, and I'll get to welding. But first, what I did here, when I set the rear end, I actually tacked all this in place because I want to make sure that the rear end doesn't move. When you're working with jack stands like this, there's a little bit of wobble. There's wobble in them, which can make up to 1/8 of an inch difference, which is a big deal actually, because you want your whole, you don't want a dog track or nothing like that. So first step here, I got these little brackets here, right? These are gonna go on the underside of the frame, or underside of the rear end like so. Okay, and these are gonna have to be on the outside of my frame, so I'll do some measuring here, and then I'll kind of mock it up, tack this into place where it needs to be. Before you finish weld, you want to make sure everything that you have is tacked up and works properly. So I'm gonna tack all these brackets up that I got, hook up all the links, and then kind of send it through its range of motion. You can kind of see if it's gonna work or not. And obviously, if you break a tack, then it's obviously not gonna work because you're putting too much pressure somewhere. So that's a good way to test it. Just do a couple tacks, and if they break, then obviously it's not gonna work. I'm doing a little bit different of a setup than most people. You can see my bottom links are actually on the inside of the frame. Most of them are on the outside of the frame. Well, I couldn't do this because my body only comes out to about here. So this would have been sticking out through my body, and that just would have looked dumb. So what I decided to do was have these on the inside. It'll still give me the structural stability I need, but it will end up not having it ruin the body lines on this car. So this is kind of a weird spot also because usually these are mounted so that the bolt hangs below the frame. Okay, you can see usually the bolt hangs below so you can get to the nut and whatever. But on this setup, I can't do that because my frame lays on the ground. So what I have to do now, I got these all mocked up and tacked in, everything works right. What I have to do is I actually have to take these out and mark this hole in here and take either a hole saw or a plasma cutter and cut out about an inch and a half hole. That'll allow me to weld a nut to the other side of this, like a weld nut type deal, so I have access to threads. Otherwise, there's really no way to do it. I could also theoretically drill a hole all the way through here and bolt whatever, but there's a bunch of stuff inside here that I don't really want to sit and try and drill through, so this will be a good method for that. And then right here, I have this set up on this reinforcing bar so that I have just enough here. You can see it's barely clearing, barely. You could also shorten these, but this will be fine, whatever. And then once these are all tacked in, you know it all works, make sure you take these bushings out. Take all this stuff out because these rubber urethane bushings or whatever will melt, and you want to take these out and weld inside all of this, whatever. This is going to be here to stay, so make sure you weld it good. Take your time, make sure everything's, lines up, measure twice, cut once kind of deal, and you're good to go. So the kit I ordered for this 4-link came with 2 extra jam nuts. So what I'm doing here, so I have twice as much threads because I have to weld this inside my frame, right, and kind of use it as a weld nut. What I'm doing is I'm welding these 2 jam nuts together. So right now I have this snug against here, and I have these 2 tight against each other, and then I'll tack these or weld these together, and then it'll give me twice as many threads to thread into. Now if you look, you can see that I got these welded together and then welded onto this also. I made sure not to get too much heat so the threads didn't get messed up. And then I took it and I ground these down a little bit, these welds that are holding this together, so that it can fit in my hole. These are about 1 inch across. The nuts were about 1 inch across before I welded on them, but I intentionally made the hole 1/8 of an inch with the hole saw so that I'd have a little bit of room extra for my welds here, so I didn't have to grind them all the way flat. Just create stronger welds. And this is all gonna be hidden, so it doesn't really matter what it looks like. Now I'll put this up on the frame into the hole and weld it up. So now you can see that I got that hole cut in my frame there. I used an 1 1/8 hole saw, as you can see right there, on a big Milwaukee electric drill. These hole saws are nice, but make sure when you're getting to the end, this is 3/16 plate, but make sure when you're getting to the end, you brace for it because when it hits, it's gonna catch and it's gonna get you. You can break your wrist, break your thumb, etc. So make sure you're holding on and ready for it. The slower you go, the less likely you're gonna get kicked back. Now you can see that it just started to catch, so that's a sign that you're gonna be going through soon, so you better brace for it. That almost got me right there. Good to go. So now you can see that I got this mount located on here, so basically all I did was I took this, pushed it into the hole that I had cut, and then I used the old tacks to kind of give me the idea of where it needs to be located, and then I just tacked back over them. And then now, since I have these all tacked, I can check all these end links again to make sure nothing got wacky on me, and then finish welding this all onto the frame here. I've been working quite a bit here on this triangulated 4-link. You can see kind of what I got going on here. Been lots of test fitting. I've redone this a couple times, trying to get all the angles to be about right and all that. Right now I have it at ride height, and that bottom bar is about 5 degrees off of 0. That's about as good as I could get it. That'll be fine for what I'm doing here. And then the top bars are at about 8 degrees. So that actually brings these together into like a, eventually they come together if you extend these, right? And you're supposed to extend these little link bars in your imagination, and they're supposed to come together at the point where the heaviest point of the car is, or where most of the weight's gonna be, which is usually right in front of the firewall. So I did that. I don't know why exactly that is. That's just what people recommended, or what or engineers recommend when you do these kits. And then most kits are actually, they usually have these bars, which are shorter. They're about 70% of the same size as the bottom ones. So they're, say if these bottom ones are 10 inches, then these ones are usually 7. But my kit here, all of them are the same length, which made it a little bit difficult for me, but I made it work. So it looks like everything seems to work pretty good. Go back up. Watch it from a few different angles. And you can also do the same just by lifting up and down the frame and letting it go up and down, just the way I got this set up right here. But that gives me the go-ahead. Now that nothing's binding, it gives me the go-ahead to go ahead and weld all these plates up in here, all these up. You can see that I got these 4-bar brackets welded onto the frame here. And then I also ended up adding a reinforcing plate on the back side right here. I don't know if you can really see it, but it's right here. And then I capped it off with a piece of sheet metal just so that it's not filling up with gunk. So right now I am welding on this, these brackets on the rear end here. Got a really nice bead there. So one tip for doing this, make sure you're gonna skip around, because you can actually screw up the axle inside the shaft here. So what I'm doing is I'm gonna do one pass here, and then one pass here on this side, let it cool for a few minutes, then do the opposite side over here. So if you look right in here, you can see that I have these brackets that are tacked on. I have them reinforced. I just have a little piece of 3/16 and another little piece of 3/16 just tacked to hold the two as far as this way, and then they're tacked together so none of it can really move. So my first step, I'm actually going to take the propane torch, which you can probably see right here, and I'm going to heat this up as much as I can. Because this is cast steel, you want it to be as warm as possible before you weld it. You'll get a better weld that way, and then I'll weld it hot. And since this is propane, I have it open pretty much all the way. MAP gas, you might not have to have it as hot, but propane doesn't burn as hot as MAP gas does. Now I'll get my temperature gauge and I'll see what it's at for temperature. That right there is spiked at 413 degrees, 470. Okay, so now I'll do the same thing and repeat on all 8 of these sides here. It's gonna take a while. I don't want the core, I don't want this to get too hot. I don't really want to burn up the seals or anything inside, so I'm kind of gonna take my time. But you still want to take advantage of some of the heat that's spreading across here. As you can see, I got really hot, solid, good wide weave beads. About as good as you're gonna get with a MIG on something like this. But they need to be strong, need to be wide, need to be penetrated as deep as possible. Because otherwise, when you weld on this stuff and you peel up, or you break it off, it's like it kind of tears out a chunk of the cast steel. So the deeper you get, the stronger your weld's gonna be, obviously.
I take it to the next plateau.
Let's get it straight. It's on. The war zone set to be loose.
I take it to the next plateau.
Let's get it straight. It's right now. The war zone set to be loose. 16 uncut direct from the coat.
I take it to the next plateau.
Let's get it straight.